Hey everybody, watch this review here with a video response to the Reviewspot's 2010 census, getting to know you the collector. Obviously this was posted quite some time ago, but kept meaning to do it, kept putting it off, then figure if I don't do it now, we'll never do it, or I guess the alternative is people come around knocking on your doors, or at least that's how the census supposedly works. But whatever, let's finally get around to doing this. Now, I'm going to read along here and then answer the questions. Hey guys, this is the first in what I hope to be an annual event here on the channel. Actually, I probably could just play the video, but I don't think he went directly to script. It's the first Reviewspot census, where I ask you guys to answer the following questions in the hopes of learning more about all of you out there on YouTube. The concept is pretty simple. Whatever you collect as an individual, whether it be Marvel, Legends, DC Universe, horror figures, etc., answer the following questions below using answers relative to your own personal collection. You can answer in the form of a text comment, or if you're up to it, post a video response to answer these questions. And here are the questions for the 2010 census. First I should clarify what I actually collect. Now, I mostly collect comic book related figures, but I also pick up some game related stuff, and then a bit of the anime and manga, mostly from the Figma and Revoltech lines, which obviously is a bit pricier, so I don't get as much of that stuff as I do the other stuff. And even video game wise, it's not like I pick up a ton of stuff just because there's not a huge availability for video game related things. Everything else I do own a lot of random miscellaneous stuff, but I don't collect it so much on a regular basis that I do consider it a collection. I have horror figures, I have G.I. Joes, but that's more or less to go along on the 4-inch scale. And of course I do collect both the 6-inch scales for the comic stuff, which I like, and the 4-inch scales, which I'm not as fond of, but I pick it up partially because it's what's available right now. So when I'm in a store, you see it, you pick it up, whatever. But say if Hasbro had Marvel Legends out at the same time, I probably would gravitate more towards the Marvel Legends and just pick up a few key pieces for the smaller scale stuff. Which is why I think it's kind of a marketing ploy on Hasbro's part to sort of discontinue the Marvel Legends just to push their smaller brands, which all sort of connect with a lot of the other smaller brands they do. Which I've actually touched upon in the past, so I probably won't get too far into that. Anyway, I believe for the purposes of the census, I will focus in on the 6-inch Marvel scale stuff I collect in addition to the DC Superheroes / Classics line. And those will be what I answer the questions. So question 1. Question the first. How long have you been collecting this line? Marvel Legends has been about a year and a quarter. Started collecting it back February or April 2009. DC Universe Classics didn't get into right away. I believe that was sometime over the summer, possibly late summer. Again, a lot of that just had to do with the fact that that was available, that was on the shelves. And I probably wouldn't have focused so much on the DC Universe Classics had Hasbro actually kept putting out Marvel Legends, and them being good Marvel Legends, not some of the kind of crappy ones they did, just because the DC Universe Classics recycles quite a bit, and there are only so many characters I'm interested in for DC, but the collecting connects do end up getting you to pick up entire waves. But I probably have just mostly bought the Batman-related stuff if it just came down to that. Question the second. What is the origin of your YouTube name? Answered this one in the past. Basically, there's a lot that you can learn just by looking at a person's name, because this is what they pick, as opposed to the names you kind of get assigned in real life. I can tell you whether or not the person has a sense of humor, how seriously they take themselves, if they're interested in, say, a certain thing, like they have wrestling in their name or something, or even, in some cases, how thorough they are. They might not have bothered to spell check their name. So In my case, I want to pick a name where you can look at it and it would tell you what it did. So, kind of like the review spot, and watch this review. And I know that a lot of people did pick sort of names that went more with branding than instead of doing a generic name, like Action Figure Expert's name tells you exactly what he is, and so forth. Other sites, I have other names. I do have a other YouTube account that I don't even bother using anymore, but this is basically the origin story for this. Question 3. From the toy line you've been collecting, what do you think is the best figure / toy from that line? You don't need to necessarily own that toy, just what do you think is the best one made to date? Marvel Legends. Pretty freaking easy. I've gone on record several times saying that I think the Sentinel is the most awesome figure that Toy Biz ever created. And yes, I'm going with most awesome. I know it sounds friggin' stupid, but hey, my prerogative. As for by the way, I don't even know what I'd pick if not a Build-A-Figure, but as for DC Universe Classics, a few picks here. I'm really fond of both versions of I just knocked over my thing. Of the Man-Bat. I mean, obviously the paint is better on the other one, but I mean, that's the traditional colors. I also really like this Joker from the Imperiex wave. But, possibly one of the coolest ones is the Ares, just because it has such a crazy amount of detail. Fortunately, you know, some of them you can't see the eyes, so minor problem. Question 4. From the toy line you've been collecting, what do you think is the worst figure / toy ever made from that line? For Marvel Legends, I'm going to have to go with Scarlet Witch, just because it looks horrendous. Then most of them have like the same production errors in terms of paint bleed between the hair and this weird freckling across the face, in addition to this really funky shadowing across the figure. Plus, it's not a very voluptuous figure, and Scarlet Witch obviously is a total hottie, so I don't know what they were thinking. Supposedly they weren't even going to originally release it in the US just because they thought it was bad, and you know, they finally went through with it just because there was a demand for it. The DC Universe Classics, actually the Superheroes Catwoman I think looks kind of crappy, but I guess the big thing there is that I just absolutely don't like the mold on those, just because the female molds for the DC Universe Classics stuff I don't think looks all that great. You know what? No, screw that. The worst one, absolute worst, is the friggin' Giganta. Legs half the time. I mean, first of all, it's a collect and connect. You've got to drop some major coin for this one. But half the time, the legs aren't aligned properly, so it doesn't stand straight. A lot of the pieces do have some random errors on it, and then, I mean, it's just a really shoddily designed figure. I mean, they could have done a lot better. So that's the worst. And I do own that. Question 5, of all the figures / toys made, was the one toy, if you could pick any one, which one would you like to see them redo and improve on? For DC, that would be the Scarecrow, which I thought looked kind of horrendous, but I mean, the other really strong contender that I'd like to see an improved version is the Killer Croc, just because both of them didn't really have a ton of articulation, neither of them was a good sculpt. As for Marvel, my number 1 would have to be the Omega Red from the Sentinel series. I'm a pretty big Omega Red fan. He and Sentinel were the two biggest reasons that I ended up getting the GameCube version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But the figure that he has in the Sentinel wave is kind of horrendous, just because, I mean, it's got an okayish face, but the body's really plain, crappy paint job, and I would just like a really buffer version of that. Question 6, and it does look like I'll probably have to break this video up, which I kind of hate doing, but what one character that is yet to be made into a figure would you like to see get made into a toy? It can be a figure that's already been made into a toy, but with a different costume or look that you'd like to see. For Marvel, I mean, there are a lot of really cool characters that do jump to mind, but the number 1 would have to be Jubilee. Really liked her during the 90s run of the cartoon, but she got incredibly shafted again and again just because Toy Biz put out like a ton of figures, and, you know, of that you'd have like a dozen different looks for Wolverine, most of which you never even saw in the cartoon or anything, but not a single Jubilee. I mean, you'd have characters appear maybe in one episode, and then not Jubilee, who basically was one of the main characters of the show, and she was usually one of the centerpiece characters in wherever story was going. I think she was the first mutant you saw in the cartoon, might even been the first character that you see in the cartoon, so I'm not sure why they never bothered doing it, but in general, toy companies kind of have a bias against female characters, and I would honestly love to see an all-female wave for the Marvel Legends. The only characters who really seemed to get figures were Storm got a few, and then I think Jean Grey had maybe one or two. From that run at any rate. I think it's time for a break.